we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. If we want to create true inner strength, you have to be mentally strong, emotionally strong, and spiritually strong, which means wise. When we have this much adversity coming at us as a collective, how can we unlock the deepest strengths and the highest potentials in human nature so we can work together to solve the world's most meaningful problems? So that's how the Deep Resilience was born. I was really looking for a framework that kind of boils down to like, how can we make this as simple and easy to follow as possible? Over the years of teaching and speaking and coaching, what I ended up seeing is that there's a specific pattern that separates the people that are going to tip into struggle in adversity and people who are going to shift into strength. What I found is that there's 4 specific skills that separate struggle from strength. So that was my inspiration for the book. How do we take what we know and feel and live it? Because there's often a gap. There is an intelligence that runs through nature and it runs through all of creation and it flows through us too. And when we humans are disconnected from that kind of intelligence, we create suffering. And when we're connected to that intelligence, our perception of life changes quite radically.
Welcome back to the Awakening Conversations podcast. My name is Kate, and today we are joined by a very, very special guest. Her name is Melli O'Brien. Melli is a world-renowned mental health educator and coach whose work has helped over 1 million people globally and has been at the front lines of mental health education and training for almost 2 decades. But after watching the staggering rise in mental illness and stress and the growing challenges in the world, she realized there was something big missing from the way mental health and resilience was being taught in the mainstream. She saw how current approaches to mental health neglect to accurately address the whole of human nature and fail to treat the root causes that undermine our power and diminish our potential. She developed the Deep Resilience Method, a cutting-edge, evidence-based psycho-spiritual framework that offers a whole person approach to developing true, deep, and lasting inner strength. And just one other thing, she has been named by Mindfulness magazine as one of the most powerful women in the mindfulness movement. Melli, welcome to the Awakening Conversations podcast.
Thanks, Katie. I'm so excited to be here, and it's just ultra special because we have been best friends also since we were 16 years old. I don't know. I don't even want to do the math publicly.
No, let's just say 16 years old and let people just have a think about maybe how long that's been. Yeah. So excited, Melli, to have you here because, with us being friends for so long, getting to have this conversation around the book that you have just written and put out into the world, that has been a culmination of your years of dedication to your growth and being this leader and being of service in the mindfulness industry. I think you've now just given the world an incredible gift with what you've written. And I have read this book, so I'm excited to share with our listeners today how powerful this is in our toolkit for us as we navigate what we're navigating in the larger collective. And also, as we do navigate our own awakenings, because the thing that really struck me when I read your book was how it was this really great example or, guidebook really for what seemed to me of my pre-awakening life and how I felt, and then how I experienced the world post-awakening. And I was just like, wow, here's a roadmap for people that they can save themselves and a spiritual, meltdown or a ego death or a dark night of the soul by really learning to understand how their minds work. And when you're able to really become very masterful with working with our mind, how it shifts us into this place of feeling and sensing this deeper part of who we are. And really, what happens for us often post-awakening is this opening to so much more potential, more of who we are, a different way of living because the mind isn't running the show. So excited to talk to you about all that's in the book, and I have so many questions. But before we dive into that, you've been in the mindfulness industry for quite some time. You've worked with some, incredible people in the field, run retreats, courses, coaching, all of it. And I've had the pleasure of being able to attend a retreat, and it was incredible. So life for you with mindfulness in your back pocket, that's something that's been very beneficial for you. I know that. But then this book wasn't really birthed from just having an incredible handle on mindfulness. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the journey that brought you to writing the book and what it was that changed for you in terms of how you approach mindfulness in the work that you do? What was missing?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, it has been really wonderful sharing the journey with you over the years. Both as like you being on retreat with me, and also just us sharing our spiritual awakenings together. Really, something that you just said, I think, is part of the answer to that question in terms of, you know, how you felt really different at times. You kind of start to get more and more discerning as time goes on, and your awakening experiences sort of like solidify and become more steady. You start to get more discerning about when you are getting caught up again. And in survival-based patterns in the mind, you start to get really discerning. Oh, I'm not stable anymore in true nature. I'm tipping somewhere else, and you start to get more and more discerning. And I think maybe part of the reason I was inspired to write this book is because it's one, like, mindfulness is an amazing tool. It's honestly potentially maybe even saved my life, finding the ability to practice mindfulness. But I mean, this book, Deep Resilience, was born from a time in my life when there was so much adversity happening at once. And I was in the mental health field and in the mindfulness field. I had all the tools. I'd been in the industry. I'd been like taught by people, this is the system to teach mindfulness. This is the system to teach mental resilience. This is what we do. I'd been teaching those things for years. But when I was on the receiving end of just so much adversity that I could barely breathe, my body's breaking down, I can't work anymore, my relationship's messed up, like I'm just in pain, so much pain. The tools that I had at my disposal, and I was using them all, I needed something more robust. And I just became curious about that, because I was teaching so many people that, you know, when I was teaching, they were there, and I felt that those people were underserved. And I was like, how can we have something that's so robust to rely on in those hard times to stay mentally, emotionally, and spiritually strong? Like, how do you stay wise and loving and steady in yourself, like connected to your values and, you know, non-reactive? I admire people who can do that. I want to like find out what those tools are. So there was that. I developed it because I needed it. I developed it because I saw a lot of need. I saw a lot of people that didn't have what I wish they had. And the third reason is because of the world that we're living in today. I think a lot of the inspiration for the book was from that as well, because I'd been really, like so many of us are, we're very aware that we're living in a world today where we've got like a climate crisis, an economic crisis, we've got a technological crisis, right? We've got people rushing to make AI right now and simultaneously saying we're creating an existential danger while we're doing this, and we're doing it anyway. We're in the middle of a mental health crisis, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, how do we as humans rise to this? The world that I'm interested in being a part of, and I know you are too, and I know your listeners, the people that tune into this conversation, are a certain kind of person, and they're like my brothers and sisters and my teammates, my soulmates. Like, we're interested in a more peaceful, equal, sustainable, loving world, a world that's flourishing. My question was like, okay, we don't seem to be rising to this right now. You know, we've got people tipping into stress and overwhelm and breakdown, and I'm one of them. At that time, I'm like, I'm one of them. I'm not able right now. I'm having trouble staying strong in the face of this adversity. When we have this much adversity coming at us as a collective, how can we unlock the deepest strengths and the highest potentials in human nature so we can work together to solve the world's most meaningful problems? So that's how the Deep Resilience was born. I was really looking for a framework that kind of boils down to like, how can we make this as simple and easy to follow as possible? So that was my inspiration for the book. And I've also, I started testing it on a lot of clients, and I testing it on myself, and I just saw what the potential was there and the power of it, and became really inspired. And deep resilience kind of became a way of living for me also. And like from a perspective of what we're talking about here in Awakening Conversations, I particularly love this because for me, it's like taking what I feel or what I have access to in meditation. And it's about embodiment. Like this framework is like, how do we take what we know and feel and live it? Because there's often a gap. And there's supposed to be a gap for like, we're not perfect, but when you do find yourself with that gap, how do you find your way back to strength again? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I really truly believe like the timing of you putting out this book is like so on point, because it is something that we need. We talk about a lot on the podcast, you know, the times that we're moving through, and we've seen it as we've entered this decade. You know, we started out with COVID and lockdowns, and really I think the rise in mental health issues that you talk about really came to a very big peak, and a large collective experience of stress and disconnection, you know, that we hadn't necessarily had before. And, you know, it just turned up the volume, and a lot of things that we were challenged by and struggling with. And, you know, it brought up a lot of questions. And for us, we say, you know, it was a time of awakening for a lot of people. And, you know, without the resources out there, what do we do? You know, and the world has continued to be challenging. So, you know, we haven't seen like some incredible improvement after that time. It's just become more and more confusing and, you know, strange, and making us question, well, what's going to happen? And so a big part of the book that you talk about is the mind, because the mind is the big part where we get caught in fear and we get stuck. And we talked about in the last few episodes in levels of consciousness, and where we're able to operate from the kind of life we're able to create for ourselves when we're stuck in fear or shame or guilt and all of those lower levels of consciousness. And what can we do there to help us rise to a place of courage as we enter into the higher levels of consciousness, because that's where we get our power back. And so I really feel like the tools and all of what you share in your book is such an incredible gift for people to understand, how do I work with the things I experience when I'm stuck in those lower levels of consciousness patterns, and the negativity, fear, anxiety, shame, guilt, worry, all of it. So, you know, again, my own awakening, or pre my awakening, my experience of my life was literally the first part of your book. So much of what you wrote there, I'm just nodding. I'm like, oh my God, that was me. Oh my God, that was me. Oh my God, that was me. The way you described the mind.
And you know what's crazy about this, Katie, and like relevant to everybody as well, is because you and I were actually going through a lot of this stuff together.
Yeah.
But we were also doing what a lot of people do, and actually not really fully sharing with each other just how much we were struggling underneath, you know, as well. Yes. So it's like everything looks okay on the surface for a lot of people, but underneath, Anyway, go ahead. Yeah, you're pre-awakening.
Yeah, so something that I would love to really start to talk about, you know, with our minds, like you said, even through that challenging time that you had the tools, right? You have the awareness, you know how to work with your mind. And I thought I had a fairly good toolkit. And I can remember an experience, and it's just etched in my memory of, we were living in Japan, renovating a hotel, and I'm waterproofing a bathroom. I'm standing on a ladder, and I've got this blue waterproof paint, and I'm painting the walls, and I'm so in my head. I'm having all these stressful thoughts. I'm so scared of how we're going to, you know, finance everything, time frames, all of the things just culminating in this just fearful thoughts. And I'm standing there painting, going, okay, you've got tools. Like, try and reframe this. How can you see the potential in this? What's the silver lining? How can you just not have that thought? And like, it just kind of feels like trying to hold your breath. And obviously it maybe brought me a tiny bit of relief in the moment, but there's so much stress in my body. There's so much anxiety. There's so much external that I'm unable to detach from, that the second a couple more strokes of the paintbrush and I'm back there in this state of fear. What I wanted to ask you is, you know, why was it so hard for me in that moment to override those thoughts? And what are the kinds of practices that I was missing that could have helped me navigate those sort of challenges? And, how could I better approach my mind to actually create a shift? Because, this is what people are experiencing right now, is this constant barrage of external stimuli that's causing fear and worry. And yet we do know some of these things inherently of like, oh, we should just try to make it positive. And it's not always easy. Why was I so stuck? What could I have done differently?
Yeah, gosh, I relate to so much of that too. I think one of the hardest things is, unfortunately, because of the world that we live in, there's lots and lots of information, and there's lots and lots of kind of like inspiring sounding stuff on like social media, and that isn't actually accurate, and is actually really, really bad mental health advice. And it's kind of like mainstream. And I know that you know this, but like I would say one of the ones that is just such a shame that it's just such a commonly thought thing is that, and this goes for meditators and people in the awakening path, trying to get rid of negative thoughts is not only not necessary, but it's harmful. There's a name for this in psychology. It's called the amplification effect. So actually, and the amplification effect works like this: the harder you try to get rid of your thoughts, the more they come back. So that means the harder you try to get rid of your stressful thoughts, the more stress you get. The more you try to get rid of your depressive thoughts, the more depression you get. The more you try to get rid of your hostile thoughts, the more hostility you get. It's a really painful place to get stuck. You're having these intrusive thoughts. You don't want them. What could be more natural than try to get rid of them? Doesn't work. Most of us get trapped in that until we know better, because it feels kind of instinctive. The key thing here for everyone to really know is that you don't need to get rid of difficult thoughts. You just need to change your relationship to them. Same thing with your whole mind. So, or what in spiritual teachings we often call the ego or the thinking mind. There is a common trap that most of us fall into in the beginning stages, where we go, okay, like, there's a setup inside me where that is an enemy, and it's something that I want to get rid of or control or subdue, or I'm going to battle with this part of myself. And what you get when you do that is you get a battle inside of yourself. The ego kind of rebels, and it's a real setup for sort of like, the more you push against it, the more it fires up against you. In the deep resilience method, where like there's this kind of assertion that we humans are like a mind, a body, and awareness, and that all parts of our human system are to be cherished and treated with respect and kindness. Like the ego or the thinking mind is there for a reason. It's everything. You hear me harp on this in the book over and over again, right? Everything your thinking mind is trying to do is just trying to protect and serve you and keep you alive. Once you understand that, any kind of hostility towards it should change. And you can suddenly see that what it needs is, it needs your leadership, it needs your kindness, and it needs your parenting, because it's stuck in this old conditioning. So I would say, like, I'm coming around to answering your question more directly, which is to say that we need to change our relationships with the mind and with the thoughts, and we need to learn the right things to do. So it's almost like learning the steps of a dance or a karate practice, right? The mind kind of goes into self-criticism and self-doubt. You just need to kind of meet that with compassion, diffuse from that thought. The two tools that we need to handle thoughts skillfully, and maybe it's beyond the scope of this podcast to go into them too deeply, but are diffusion, which is what mindfulness does, this ability to step back from a thought and realize it's just a mental event, just some like sounds moving through your mind. It's not the truth or something you have to obey or play out, just a bit of sounds in your mind. So diffusion, so that the thought is still there, but it no longer defeats you or defines you. You're not stuck in it. And then redirection. So diffusion and redirection are the two tools you need. But when it comes to positive thinking, the part where people get tripped up with positive thinking is, if you are not truly diffused from a thought. So if you're thinking to yourself something like, God, my partner's such an idiot, like they always do, like you're full in some kind of thought stream that's like really hostile and grippy. And then you go, oh, no, don't think a thought like that. Everything's fun and I love everything about them. Your mind is like in the background doing an eye roll going, no, they're not. Like you sort of have this, you can't BS yourself in your own mind. Like you have to genuinely catch yourself going, oh, my mind is thinking the thought that my partner is a blah, 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 blah. And you have that moment of like true freedom where you go, oh, I was just stuck in a bit of a hypnosis there. Usually diffusion on its own is enough. It's actually enough. Usually diffusion on its own is just like breaking a spell. You usually don't actually need to do any redirection after that. It's kind of like seeing through the magician's trick or something, you know, you're like, I see. And then usually you diffuse and then you just get on with what you're doing in life.
Yeah.
But redirection is really helpful when the thought is sticky. Redirecting your thoughts somewhere else. I don't usually advise people to use like positive thinking per se, but to find a thought that's actually truer if you need to. Like, hang on a second, there's more to my partner than that. They also do this and this and this for me, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
You're not BSing. Yeah. Or to ask yourself a question. That's like, how can I think about this in a more useful or helpful way? It's easy to get caught up in a trap of kind of like having some really difficult thoughts and then getting caught up in patterns that actually amplify them, make them louder, make them stay around longer, and then to keep getting stuck in that battle of like fusion, stuck in them, and then fighting them fusion, and then fighting them fusion, and fighting them. And that's a sticky one to get out of.
Yeah.
Without the right tools, it's a sticky one. With the right tools, it's actually very, very quick and simple, not hard.
Yeah. Even as you described that, you know, my awakening was coming to understand I had an ego, and that what these sort of 2 years prior to my actual experience was my ego trying to protect me from a lot of crazy things happening in my life. And, you know, over time developing a story and a narrative and certain beliefs, but also projecting a whole lot of blame. That was a big thing. And then that's when things started to get really challenging for me, because it started to push people away, cause issues in my relationship, and everything else outside of me was a problem, and I had to get away. And so in some parts it was the truth. My life had changed dramatically in that 2-year period. We'd moved from Hungary to Japan and went from having my own online coaching business to renovating a hotel in a very short period of time, opening a restaurant and a cafe and trying to get it all sorted, and then running it, and that being incredibly intense and stressful. And then, you know, it goes on from there. But what's something that I really learned about the ego through my awakening was that it is sort of like it chases its tail, right? You described this experience of trying to shut down a negative thought, but then, you know, it's kind of like it just infuses, or it's sort of self-fulfilling to then think more negative thoughts about things. And I've always say when I teach anyone about the ego is that you'll give yourself a hard time or tell yourself you can't do something, that you're not capable, you don't have enough skills. So like, especially if you're going after something in your life and you have this inner desire, something coming from our place of wisdom, a deeper part of us, the deeper self, as you refer to, that's really calling us forward to a life of, you know, living in alignment with the truth of who we are. But the ego comes in and says, no, you don't have enough skills, you're not smart enough, you're not this enough. And so you decide not to do it. But then the ego will come around the back door and give you a hard time for not following your dreams. You're too this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay. And then you get stuck on this loop and this cycle of like, you listen to that because you're in fear, but then it gives you a hard time. So it just perpetuates these cycles. And so the beautiful thing that you said there, of that diffusion, is stepping back. And it's something I remember you saying on the retreat. And I went to your retreat right before my awakening. It was a doorway that kind of started to get me a space, I think, to start to see, okay, wait a second, there's something else going on here. This isn't actually what's happening in my story I'm telling myself, maybe isn't all of what's happening. However, the story made me feel so bad. I had a lot of pain and stress and, you know, unhappiness. But the diffusion piece, I'm having the thought that, like, that's such a powerful tool to kind of create instant space. And that's the thing that I loved learning about mindfulness, was it's a way to create space from all of the noise up here. Like, I'm having the thought that you can instantly pull it outside of you and look at it, be like, oh, how interesting. You know, there's a instant neutralizing of emotion when we're like, well, it's not me having the thought. My mind is having the thought that, oh, what do I want to do now?
Yeah. So for your listeners, it's amazing. One of the most powerful diffusion tools is just to change your language. If I was coaching a client and they said to me, I'm such an idiot, I might say to them, oh, that sounds like a really painful thought. Let's try rephrasing that and see how it feels and if it feels truer to you. And then I might get them to say it again, but this time say, I'm having the thought that I'm such an idiot. And then, as you said, and then you can kind of see how that feels and then go, okay, well, actually there's something even more truer, which is my mind is having the thought that I'm an idiot. Often if you find yourself caught up in some really gnarly, unhelpful thinking patterns, that can be such a powerful thing. Just pause for a second and say, hang on a second, let me check if that's truer and rephrase it. The other thing is discernment, right? So that we're not getting caught up in these patterns over and over again. I have honestly found, Katie, some of the fundamentals of this stuff are so outrageously simple, but that's where the power is. I've found that over the years, like my favorite discernment tool, which I write about in the book, is the mental strength line, which is literally, I mean, it's just like, I won't go into the whole practice right now. If you're having that thought when it comes back in the back door, because that happens a lot, like it's like you'll catch one thought, your ego will kind of, it's got you. And then you notice it and you go, I see you. And then it goes, yeah, well, you might have seen me this time, but you didn't see me, and and you're such a loser. Like it'll just come straight in the back door and start again. And just the simple checking to go like, is this thought helpful or useful, or is it not? Okay, so if your mind goes, you're such an idiot, and you go, oh, I caught you. Thanks, mind, but that's not very useful or helpful. And then your mind comes back in the back door again, and you're just kind of asking yourself continuously, is this thought in any way useful or helpful? It's just it's another diffusion tool where you just go, instead of getting stuck in it or believing it, you just go, you know what, let me just check. Is this thought helping me in any way? Is it useful? If not, then become present again. Bring your mind to your senses. The practice that I teach a lot is just say thanks. Thanks, mind. I know that you're just trying to help me survive. Give the little guard dog a pat. And then just come back to the present moment. And doing all of that with an attitude of kindness and gentleness with the mind and with yourself. Like, okay, it's not very useful. Let me just come back to what I was doing.
Yeah, and I think you talk about self-compassion in the book, and we'll go into your actual method in a second. But, self-compassion, I learned it on your retreat, and it's something that I literally use to this day. I've had my awakening, and it was very fear-based thought. I was able to have an experience that in a sense, that part of my programming or that program in my mind just was deleted because I came face to face with it and confronted it and was like, that's not true. And so this it just shut down. While that initial episode for me really quashed a lot of fear and fear-based thinking, as I've continued on my path post-awakening to realize there's a different way for me to live, there's more of me to express, different fears come up. Right? Your next level of fears come up, and it's like, well, being your true self in the world, what are people going to think? And fear of being judged, fear of criticism, all of that sort of stuff. And so fear comes up a lot still post-awakening. We're never devoid of it. But compassion is such a powerful practice and tool that I have that literally whenever fear comes in, I make a point of, instead of having a battle with my mind or listening to the story or believing it, I literally imagine it as just putting an arm around my fear, welcoming fear to the table. We're in this together. I appreciate you being here. This is an edge. We are standing at an edge. Thank you for showing up to protect me. And truly such a neutralizer. Doesn't take the fear away. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand. We're never going to be devoid of fear. And you talk about a lot in the book, really how our minds are wired in such a way that it's part of our biology. It's part of it's sort of structuring, right? We can't expect to have a fearless life.
It's not wrong. It's nothing wrong with it being there. It's supposed to, we are human. And we have all of the emotions that we feel for sensible reasons. I think that's one of the things in the awakening journey that can be tricky, isn't it? To feel like, if you feel fear still, or sadness or grief or anger or shame, there's something, you are so unawakened and you are so And the truth is that it's not about those things not showing up. It's how are we relating to it? That's the question you want to always be asking yourself. When the thing shows up, are you judging yourself for it? Are you putting yourself down for it? Are you fighting it? Are you trying to get rid of it? Like, how are you meeting? Because it's you, your core essence underneath. Are you present in the game and meeting, like what you just said? That's beautiful. Your loving awareness, your deep nature goes, I see you, fear. Come here, honey. You belong. I love you. Let's do this together. That's awakening in action. That's like such a beautiful description.
We hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Awakening Conversations podcast. And if you are, we'd love for you to hit subscribe. This helps us enormously to grow our channel and to get these conversations in front of more and more people. We really appreciate you being here and tuning in. So let's now return to today's episode. Yeah, thank you. And so it is a powerful tool.
Yeah, the self-compassion, there is a powerful tool, isn't it? To help you stay steady in deep nature.
And then it allows you to, fear can be so noisy and like loud and hold you back, keep you stuck. But when you welcome it into the experience, it's like, well, even in my mind, I get the picture of it going from this like wolf with sharp fangs and that evil face to you welcome it and give it a hug, it turns into a puppy. It's still a dog, maybe still a wild animal, but it softens. Fear softens because it's allowed to be there.
Yeah, I love that. I often use that like metaphor of the guard dog, like our inner guard dog that might be like barking and making all this noise, but it's just doing that because it's trying to protect you and keep you safe. Sometimes it just needs you to give it a little pat and go, I see you, buddy. Thank you so much. I know you, like, fear is often actually on your side, and it's on your side.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't know any better than to play out these old conditioned patterns. So we just need to find a way to work with it so that we don't get disconnected from what's deepest and truest and best in us.
And so let's talk about your RISE method, because this is a way for us to cultivate deep resilience so that we can navigate the times that we're navigating with the sense of strength, inner strength, mental, spiritual, and emotional strength. Do you want to share with us more about what the RISE method is, how it's really helping us to have these strong inner senses to be able to really just ride the waves and the storm, but with a sense of groundedness and an ability to tap into choice, as we keep talking about on this podcast, like being able to see how even when things are crazy, that we do have the power to create our own reality, to choose something different, to not be completely overcome by fear and feeling hopeless and powerless.
Yeah, so over the years of teaching and speaking and coaching and working with so many people, and also seeing patterns. So I think that's one thing that my mind does well, is like taking lots and lots of information and taking patterns in the ways that I work with people and see. So what I ended up seeing, and this is in the research as well, is that there's a specific pattern that sort of separates the people that are going to tip into struggle in adversity and people who are going to shift into strength. They're kind of going to like double down, and something that they do mentally separates from the rest. And these are the kind of people that we look at and we really admire them, right? Like the people who really step into their courage and their power, and they, we might even think about them as heroes. And I write about that in the book as well. That a lot of this stuff is like quiet heroism. It might not be grandiose, but people who manage to stay strong, wise, loving, connected to purpose in the face of adversity, non-reactive and effective. So what I found is that those four things, there's four specific skills that separate struggle from strength. And they've actually, this is the really good news, is that they've been there for thousands of years. Like, I'm not reinventing the wheel here at all. The cool thing is, not only have they been around for a very, very long time and been spoken about for a very long time, but they've also been now proven by science. It's a really exciting time for us to live in, because say 50, 100 years ago, we didn't have all this. There's like an avalanche of 50 years of research on this stuff now. So it's really cool. It's encouraging, because it means the skills are really reliable. And they're also deeply spiritual. Like they're grounded in spirituality, but backed by science. That's so cool and encouraging. I formed the Deep Resilience Method into an acronym. rise, as you said, as in like we're going to rise to our challenges. So the 4 skills are we need to be able to recognize and regulate our thoughts and emotions in healthy and helpful ways. So the recognize part is really important because we know that if you don't recognize something, if you don't know it's operating, it's very hard to change it. You just kind of get stuck and you get caught up and you don't really know why. You're just stressed or you're just negative or you're just stuck in a shame spiral. So recognize and regulate thoughts and emotions. Step 2 is to inhabit the present moment. And that's about like connecting to our deeper nature and the strengths that are inherent to it, which I believe are the greatest strengths and the highest potentials of human nature. In the first part, recognize and regulate, what we're doing is we're kind of clearing and uncluttering our minds and hearts. Like we're sort of using the tools that we have to stop getting stuck so that we can stabilize in something deeper. So R, I, inhabit the present moment. S stands for stay connected to your values. So in adversity, it's pretty easy to get thrown around by thoughts and emotions. Like, of course it is, right? We're going to feel, every single one of us, myself included, it's going to get a big influx of strong thoughts and emotions and impulses when we're going through any kind of hardship. The urge to be reactive is pretty strong too. So to not be thrown around by all that stuff, we need something strong and stable to rely on. And that is a strong sense of clarity about what our values are. So values are things like, they're the inner qualities that we believe are important in the way that we act in our lives. So things like kindness, integrity, courage, there's hundreds and hundreds of values, family, adventure, playfulness, curiosity. These are all ways of being. And each of us has a set of core values that matter the most to us. They're individual to us. Most values matter to everyone sometimes, but for each one of us, we all have our own unique set of core values. And if we get really clear on what those core values are, then whenever life gets tough, we can stay connected to those values. And it's almost like the foundations of a house. You build your house on rock. When the storms come, you're very stable and connected to your values, and you know then how you want to act and who you want to be in that time. You can't control a lot, can't control other people, can't control what the government's doing, can't control the weather. So many things we can't control, but staying connected to our values keeps us focused on who we want to be in that situation, what we can control, and how we want to respond instead of reacting. So guided by our values. And the E in the RISE method stands for empowered action. Engage in empowered action. So, maybe we can have these beautiful spiritual states and a sense of connected to our values, but that doesn't really mean much if we're not actually engaging. If we're not able to integrate that into our life through our actions and our speech and things, like we're not going to be fulfilled. We're going to feel this weird gap in between what we know and who we are, and we'll lack a sense of real agency in our life. So taking empowered action means action that is guided by awareness and your values. You're acting with awareness and in alignment with your values, even when it's really, really difficult to do so, which it often is in hard times. It's like sometimes it's a bit of an inner struggle. So if you can take empowered action, like it doesn't have to be big. If you can take empowered action guided by your values and awareness, what it does is it gives us back a sense of agency and empowerment, even when everything else is really crazy. To give an example, I had one client, I'll call her Sue, I won't use her real name, and she was feeling very, very overwhelmed by a situation where another person, she's having a conflict situation with someone, and her mindset was very much like, they're doing this and I don't want them to do that, and they shouldn't do this and treat me like that. And so amazing when we just brought her focus back to just accepting that, can't control that, and that's hard. So we give ourselves compassion. I can't control the fact that this person's acting in ways that are really painful for me. But if we practice kind of like a mindful acceptance of that, okay, right now that's how it is. What can I control? Who do I want to be in this situation? There's that old saying, when they go low, you go high. Have you heard of that saying? Like when other people go low, you stay high. That's kind of like the wrap-up message of this in a way, her connecting to who she wanted to be, and her values were around something like compassion and kindness. And she was not letting this person be a doormat, but she just stayed really focused on how she wanted to handle it with as much dignity and kindness as she could, and had a sense of agency within that again. So it's just this kind of like quiet coming home to ourselves again, and not letting who we want to be defined by the other circumstances that are happening. So really cool to know that decades of research has now shown that it's not what happens to us, but how we respond to what happens to us that is the determinant of like our quality of life and our happiness and well-being. That's so encouraging, because we can't control so many things.
Yeah.
But through the RISE method, through just kind of regulating the thoughts, coming back to center, stay connected to who you are, and then acting, sort of just taking back your power, and then offering, I think, your strength, your gift, your love, your wisdom to the world, no matter what's happening. And of course, the boomerang effect there happens where, you're still offering your kindness, you're still offering your wisdom, you're still staying as rooted and grounded in that as you can. But it boomerangs back to you, because your quality of life, according to the research, is much better. Your happiness is much better. Your agency is much better. So we move there from a state of hopelessness or overwhelm or reactivity into a state of agency and empowerment, and a certain sense of calm and centeredness, I think, too.
Yeah. I think that really speaks beautifully to something that we do talk about a lot here, is like being the creators of our experience, and as you said there, like even in the regulate stage, when we may find ourselves caught up in the narratives on the outside and the stories and the fear and the, just the constant barrage, there is the potential to connect with that, fuse with that, have that affect our emotional state, our physical state, our stress levels, and then that be our experience. But then through your method, you're giving people the actual steps to, okay, if I find myself there, I've got these tools through the RISE steps to disengage, come back to that place of choice. And the thing that I love about values, I think, as you said, when we're in those moments where life is super challenging, the first things to go out the window, right? Because we go into survival basically, right? Like, how do I not be in this? And, parts of the brain even shut down, right? Because we're in stress states.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it gets hijacked, basically. Yeah, your brain gets hijacked when you're really reactive. Yeah. So you need to find a way to unhook that.
And your method has, so many incredible avenues for us to do that. So this book is filled with tools. But I think too, when we aren't living in accordance with our values, and something that I've done with values through coaching over the years is, once we are able to identify them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you honoring them? If it's anywhere below 7, like, we're going to feel a certain level of dissatisfaction with our lives, a disconnection from our lives. And I think you can even apply it to certain situations with people, when we're having, like, the example you gave there with someone having sort of a challenging experience with people, like, which of my values is not being honored here? How is that not being honored in the situation? How am I not honoring that? What would it look like for me to look at this situation if I did honor that value more? And I think that's really where we come to draw boundaries on things. And as you say, move ourselves into a place of agency, because we're literally bringing a power back to us by saying, well, this is what fundamentally me being in my power, is when I honor these things that, the bedrock of who I am, my values. And when we do live our lives really with them at the core of what we're doing, as you say, through our empowered action, like, that is us in our creatorship. That is us saying, this is what's meaningful and real to me. And this is how I live a life that's really quite fulfilling and meaningful. And as you say, it's creating the happiness that we want. It's creating the life that we want, which is us, essentially living in that higher, because we're amplified, our vibration raises because of our choices to be in alignment. And it's really bringing us a deep sense of joy. And as you say, like, we can manage to walk through the world with all of its external influences, but yet it is such a firm foundation within us when we know ourselves in that way to say, well, this is what's good and right and real for me. And if I can manage to really, really honor that, you're going to feel this different way of walking through the world. I think values is a really powerful thing to become aware of.
It's interesting because in the context of this kind of conversation, really, I see it as like we're trying to give language here in the RISE framework. We're trying to give practical, useful language for living in alignment with our deeper nature, really. We could use other language, you could wrap other language around it, but it's a really great, like you said, when you kind of, if you can even check in every now and then and go, like, at work or in my relationship or in this domain of my life, how, you can kind of be quite structured with this and write it out and go, how in alignment with my values am I? And that might not seem like it at face value, but that's a very spiritual practice. It's like a check-in and go, how can I move closer to who I really am in my deepest nature? What your values are kind of like a way of us expressing what true nature looks like walking in the world, It's like, this is the expression. This is the expression of who I am deep down. It can be a very, very deeply spiritual practice. And one of the little shortcuts that I love is that, and because this is not a perfection project either, like I've got so much to learn. My life is like messy too sometimes, and I make mistakes and I don't do this perfectly, but I'm very committed to this path and I keep choosing. I just keep choosing again, keep choosing deep resilience. But like one of the little practical things I love to do is just when I'm feeling like I'm a bit lost or overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, or something's happening that I'm feeling a bit off center, like often I'll just put a hand on my heart for a second and just try and drop my awareness from here to here and just ask myself something like, what would love do? Or what's my highest intention in this moment? Who do I really want to be in this moment? It's kind of like one of those things that maybe just thinking about your listeners, maybe everyone doesn't know their values yet. And, but that can be a simple way to just kind of touch in with yourself. Like, what really matters to me here? What is my highest intention here? Good way to kind of step out of the mind and reconnect.
Yeah. And so really, we're talking here, we've started off sort of talking about the mind and, mental health, but we're now into a conversation about spirituality. I know that you feel that, this is kind of, what's the word? Like we're really not offering society anything of great value by separating mental health from spirituality.
Yeah, I don't believe they're two separate things at all, which is part of the reason why, remember when I was younger, I was studying to be a social worker. I wanted to do psychotherapy. I wanted to do counseling with people. And I actually ended up leaving that because there's two things. Like, I felt really inspired because I wanted to pass these tools to people. I like the idea of, instead of someone doing a therapy session with me, they can come and do read the book or do something where then they have the skills for life. So that's inspiring to me. And though I kind of had this feeling like the way we're doing mental health is really weird. It's quite broken. It's sort of like, we're doing the spiritual teachings over here, therapy over here, and there's kind of like some kind of mental health education, although was there. I'm not sure. I'm still not sure we're really getting that right at all in any sort of structured, easy to understand way. It feels a bit piecemealy. The fact that we are separating those is coming at a very, very high cost to our culture, because if you learn some strategies to be, say, like more emotionally intelligent or more mentally well, so that you're not tipping into stress and anxiety, but you're totally underdeveloped in wisdom, right? So in my book, I'm kind of like, if we want to create true inner strength, you have to be mentally strong, emotionally strong, and spiritually strong, which means wise. So I know the word spirituality is not for everyone, but wisdom. And I think, like, without wisdom, if we're underdeveloped in wisdom chronically in our society, that's going to come at pretty big cost, because first of all, not being in touch with your values or not really understanding like how to orient yourself, it's going to mean that you're not going to feel very fulfilled. And that's a shame. I mean, It's a shame. We're not here to just survive. We have enough resources in our society. You know, at the end of David Attenborough's recent documentary, I think his closing words were, if human beings are going to survive now with what we're doing, we're going to need more than just intelligence. We're going to need wisdom. So he's pointing to something here that's really important, right? Another quote that I like to use a lot and that I use in the book as well is from Mark Manson, who says, wisdom without intelligence, you can probably live still a pretty contented and happy life. Intelligence without wisdom is a special and dangerous form of stupidity. When we are underdeveloped in wisdom in the world, and we have a lot of intelligence, and so what we're seeing, I don't really have to unpack this too much for everybody. Like, I think right now in the world, what we're using, probably some of the smartest, most intellectually intelligent people in the world, is to make weapons. Yeah. Right. To kill each other. And we're making AI at lightning speed while saying this could kill us all, but we'll do it. We're just going to do it in case the competition over here wins. We need to compete with them too. So that lacks what I would call wisdom. There is an intelligence that runs through nature, and it runs through all of creation, and it flows through us too. And when we humans are disconnected from that kind of intelligence, we create suffering. And when we're connected to that intelligence, we live in much more harmony with the world. We feel that our perception of life changes quite radically. Yes. And this is not just me saying it from my personal experience. There's lots of research on the way that meditation and some other things like psychedelic experiences really fundamentally changes people's perception of themselves and the world. And people feel much more of a sense of connectedness to and reverence and belonging in life, which then they want to protect life, and they happier to live simply. They become much more kind and benevolent and disinterested in a lot of the things that we say, like the thinking mind left to its own devices is interested in. So being underdeveloped in wisdom and overdeveloped in mental emotional intelligence is not a good idea, because then we wield those powers in ways that are disconnected from the actual reality of our belonging and interconnectedness, our true nature, and the true nature of how we fit into this, the rest of life. We create a lot of suffering in ourselves and with others. But wisdom on its own, I have often seen, because I've been teaching, in the sort of mindfulness field for a long time, I think that on its own, it also falls quite short, because we need to be able to, if we're not mentally and emotionally strong, then we know, like, we just fall into those old patterns again. So we need to be able to take what we know and what we understand when we maybe do some spiritual practice or have some realization. We need to actually be able to bring that in and live it much more fully. So I think that spiritual teachings was that was the first mental health education. That's kind of what it was. But I think about it, instead of being separate things, I think about it as a scale, right? So there's the shallow end of the pool where we're getting you out of suffering here and helping you cope a bit better. But in reality, once you start to really get good at those skills, just naturally you're going to experience, and I know this happened to both you and I, naturally, without you meaning to, you have more access to a deeper part of your nature. I talk about values as a separate thing, but usually what happens is when you get more in touch with your deeper nature, you just suddenly, when you do those things that are out of alignment, you get a big feedback that you're like, whoa, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. It's somehow a more visceral sense of that's out of alignment. Yes. That's out of alignment. Yeah. But values can help us just concretize it a bit more and make it more real and practical.
Yeah. I think once again, you've just really beautifully described the experience of an awakening, because, we moved from, or at least in my experience and the way that it was for me, going from just a mental state to one that was more spiritual, moving from just operating from this place of intellect, disconnected from my body and anything deeper. And then that realization of actually there's more to that. And then how do I live with both? And I always say too that, when we've started to understand our ego and work with it and see where it is caught in its negative loops, the stories, the narratives, the beliefs that we hold that limit us and keep us kind of stuck in those mental patterns that don't serve us. When we're able to understand that, and then through, like your method, like compassion and inquiry and doing the healing and really reframing our relationship with our ego, because we need one to function in the world, and we have more access to that soul self or that deeper self or that deeper nature, our ego becomes in service to us expressing that deeper nature. So that's why it's still, important to who we are. But like you're saying there, it is then how our wisdom, that deeper self, is married with our emotional abilities and our mental abilities and our intellect to be like a whole human. We bring all of us to be the best of who we can be. And like you said, once we have an access to that deeper nature of ourselves, our relationship to everyone else changes. We see the world in a different way. You feel the world in a different way. You do feel connected to it. And so it's a really beautiful that your book is really taking people beyond just how do I not think like this into a deeper experience of who they are, how they can live with a deeper sense of peace, meaning, connection. And I think when you've really practiced these methods, and as you said, they become part of your own just repertoire in your day, because life is life and it's always going to life. So having skills like this helps us to have that kind of experience more often than not. And it's easier for us to come back to that deeper sense of purpose and meaning, even when the world looks like it's about to blow up. So Melli, I'm so proud to be able to say, my best friend has written this incredible book. I have read it, and truly I think it's a gift that the world needs right now for so many reasons. There's just so much in here that you've given, practices, tools, and your process in and of itself is going to help people really find such a powerful place within them to be able to rest, connect with, lean into, develop a connection with, to navigate what we're going through. And your episode is airing the day that your book is actually going on sale. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about where people can learn about you, the book?
Yes. So it's launching today if you're watching this, which is so cool. I really feel deeply passionate about making these skills as accessible to as many people as possible. I really believe that we should be learning these skills while we're learning our ABCs at school, but most of us haven't had the chance to. So on launch day from 11 a.m. Australian time, I think it's 12:01 a.m. UK time, and probably Monday evening in the US.
So we're talking the 17th of February and the 18th of February there?
Yes. So for that time, the book is available on Kindle for $1 for 48 hours, and all the proceeds go to charity. So they're going to go to mental health charities around the world. So if anyone feels like they've been just caught up in a bit of struggle or stress or a bit stuck on their awakening journey, I think this book will be really helpful for you. I hope it does really serve people to suffer less and be a bit stronger and wiser and more loving.
Yeah, well, thank you for writing this book, Melli. I know it's been something you've wanted to do for a long time, and it's here and it's happening and it's out in the world. And if you'd like to learn more about Melli, her website is melliobrien.com. You have some great resources on there. You also have your own podcast.
Yeah, it's called Deep Resilience Podcast. There's some free stuff on my website as well. If I have a Deep Resilience toolkit, if you're going through a bit of a hard time right now and you're looking for a little bit of extra support, that's really handy as well.
Yeah, amazing. And we'll link to all of that in the show notes and on our website. So Melli, thank you so much for being a guest. I wish you all the best with this book.
Thank you so much, Katie. This is the best podcast ever. It's just such a privilege, and it's so special just to be able to do this with you. And yes, thank you so much for being my rock through all of these years and supporting me and loving me through all my ups and downs and awakening with me together. May the journey continue.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll join you in the next episode.